Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Different Kind of Doula. My name's Colleen. I'm one of the three co-hosts of this show, and with me today is Maureen. And Kathleen is out of town, but she'll be back with us next week. Today's show is how to hire an end-of-life care doula or death doula. And it's a real challenging conversation of which all three of us are end-of-life care doulas, and we have confronted this issue of how you hire someone. We have had people ask us this question. So let me lay the scenario for you. Let's imagine that you've just found out one of your loved ones has been diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer. And now the doctor said, we can give them chemo, but we're going to have to do a number of steps with this. And you are totally overwhelmed because you're in the workforce. You tell your family, their world now is turned upside down and they're in crisis and they don't know who's going to take care of this person until one of your family members says, there's these people out there that are called end-of-life doulas or death doulas. And now you have this piece of information, but you don't know where to go with it. And so you're wondering, okay, now what? So this show is about those steps on how you hire a death doula or end-of-life doula. So Maureen, I'm wondering if you'd like to give some advice to our audience.
Oh, Colleen, I always love to give advice. I would suggest going to our great friend Google and Googling end-of-life doula, death doula, and the town that you live in. And you'll have things pop up. They might not be actually in your town, but they will be surrounding. You could always put in the state that you live in too. So that's just the starting point, because then you have to dig deeper, which we're going to talk about in this show. And I wanted to just share, I recently went through that. I'm working with a client in another state, and in our conversations of end-of-life planning, and we were talking about maybe they could benefit from having an end-of-life doula on their team, and as their disease progressed. Well, they didn't know where to start. So I said, let me do some research for you. So I started Googling end-of-life doulas in their area. That was great. I found a few, and I picked 4 from looking at their credentials, which we'll talk about. And then I picked up the phone and I started calling and I interviewed them to see if I thought they might be a good fit with this client that I'd been working with for quite a while, to make sure that if someone was there vigiling at their bedside, if they hired this person as a care, a bedside care doula, would they be a fit? So I narrowed it down, and then, I had this client and their family speak to a couple different doulas. They're not there yet where they need a bedside caregiver doula, but just to have it in the works. So they've already establishing a relationship. So I think that Googling is the first way to start. There's funeral directors. A lot of the funeral directors in towns have relationships with end-of-life and death doulas. You can do doula directories online. You can look for your state. There's, what's the one? Deathdoula.com, I think it's called. And you can go by state and see if there's any doulas in your state that might happen to be in your area. What else do you think?
The National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, NADA, and International End-of-Life Doula Association. But I like how you started it. Just Google it, put death doula in there. And first of all, those organizations do come up right away.
Right.
So, I think you've covered it. Referrals, of course, are the best if you can get them, but that gets into another area of not jumping to the first person name you get,
I would really advise, don't jump to the first person. Interview a number, at least a handful of doulas, because this is the most intimate time of life, truly. When you think about it, it's the most sacred, especially as you're getting towards that bedside vigiling doula. It's someone that you want to make sure you have a personality, that your personalities mesh, and that those of your family, mesh with this person, because that person is going to be walking alongside you during that very sacred time.
And I think when you talk about meshing personalities and things, the characteristics that I look for in a doula are compassion, for one, because that's what doulas are there for, is the compassion and the support and the warmth. So when they walk through the door, how do you feel? Do they make you feel welcomed? Welcoming? Are they welcoming? In other words, do you feel that warmth from them? And do they place your family or your loved one who's dying at ease? That's another thing. Do they come across confident? I personally like people who are very confident in their approach. And also, do they listen? Are they good listeners?
As we know, listening is key.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are some of the things that when you're saying, do they mesh? Those are some of the things I look for. But
Yeah.
there's so many other things. And I know you're big on the interview type of questions,
Right, right. I mean, you should. So that's one of the things we want to talk to you about today is what you should look for. And I think, Colleen, you and I both agree that doulas are not, it's not a regulated field. Colleen and I are both nurses. We have an extensive nursing background. That's a very regulated field. So really anyone can hang up a shingle and say they're a death doula. And without any training, without anything, but maybe they helped mom or dad or their Aunt Millie through a death, and they had a heart of compassion and thought, I want to do this, and they create a business around it. And that's where we would advise to really look deeper. Have they gone through a doula training program? There's not certification per se, but there are certificates of completion for end-of-life training, doula training programs, death doula training programs, and that lays a solid foundation. So you want to find someone that has had some formal training in becoming an end-of-life doula.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about that. I do predict in 5 years it'll probably be more regulated. And I know the national organizations for doulas are working toward that. I think that training is important. And then, as in any interview question, you want to get to know the individual a little better. So you want to find out, what is their philosophy of death? If that question comes up in your mind, what is their philosophy of death? And why did you become a doula, a death doula of all things? Why? So Maureen, how would you answer that question? I know why I did.
I became, well, first of all, I didn't even know a death doula existed until about, well, probably just about 3-4 years ago. I'd never even heard the term. So like I said, extensive background in nursing. Most of it was in the end of life fields. And I found early on that I had this heart for working with my patients and their families through the dying process, that it wasn't scary to me. And as I've grown older, I missed working in that arena. And so this is a way that, even though it's non-medical, it feeds that need for me to be part of the journey with the family. It's very important to me to have people experience, peaceful deaths. And I've seen it both ways, where it's peaceful and where it's not peaceful. And peaceful is so much better. So my heart is to help someone, the whole family, those that matter most, whether it's your biological family or the family that you choose, to be surrounded in love and peacefulness. That's truly my whole reason for going into this work.
And I think that's part of the thing that in the training that I have, and I know you have had, you have to look at your own feelings about death. And if you didn't think you had a philosophy, it comes up. So for me, it's like I see death as a journey, from birth and then living until you actually die. And what I believe is that all living forms die, and it's a natural course of life. And that's where I think our death aversive culture hopefully eventually gets more death positive about things, realizing this is natural. And as far as why I ended up here, I've always fascinated with death, even as a child. But I think, in nursing, it wasn't, it just wasn't a sacred experience. I mean, person died, then you prepared the body, family often wasn't there, and then you have to do these god awful things of putting a toe tag and identification on them. And it wasn't until my mother's death, who died in a freestanding hospice and had a ceremony and everything that the staff did, that I realized, oh, this is the beauty of death. So,
Yeah.
everybody's different.
As you're saying that, I remember my son was volunteering at a freestanding hospice center. And one night he came home, he was living at home in between college and his next graduate school. But a man died. And he said it was the most beautiful thing. The staff lined the hallway. They had a beautiful quilt, and they sent this person off instead of, as you were talking about, as nurses, we used to do the body bag thing. And I'm still horrified that when my dad died, I was so busy trying to comfort my mom and my nephew and my sister and everyone that was there. Never dawned on me to look at the whole experience. And that was the last vision of my dad that we all had, was him coming out of my house, my childhood home, in a body bag. And that's another thing, being an end of life doula, I never want that to happen to anyone else. I was horrified that I hadn't even thought about that. And so having my son come home and talk about the beauty and the sacredness of this man leaving the hospice center, I get all teary because that's how it should be. And that's how, it can be.
That's how it was with my mother. She had a quilt, she had rose petals, flower petals around her body. They wheeled her out, and then my sister and I wheeled her down this candle, lit hallway, lighting. And the funeral directors or the funeral people met us at the door, but never put her in a body bag. Her face was uncovered. They wheeled her out of sight.
Yes.
And that was the beauty of that. And I never forgot that. Didn't get into this industry until later, but that memory, I mean, just like you're describing with your son, I mean,
yeah,
that memory is always there.
Like he will always have that memory of how death can, how the death experience can be, versus my nephew, who was thinking of the body bag going out. So yeah. Anyway, so really look into their philosophy and why they became a death doula. I think that will speak volumes about the person you hire.
The biggest thing, and you and I have had several discussions over this, are contracts.
Oh.
And I know you have feelings about that too, contracts. But in the contract, there is so much a person needs to look for. And I'm just wondering some of your thoughts on that, because if you don't have a contract, you should not hire a doula without a contract. It should not be word of mouth. Oh, I'll do this and I'll do that. No, it's a legal document, contract. So what do you think? What are your thoughts on contracts?
I think contracts make good relationships because they give very clear definition of what a doula will do and what a doula won't do. And so, because not all doulas do the same thing, it's not a one size fits all. Like in our doula collective, we all have our own little niche that we focus on. But I think that looking like what services do they do? What's the time commitment? Meaning how long will this contract be enforced? Gosh, jump in here with me and help me out,
Well,
Colleen.
yeah, I mean, I
So
think,
many things, but
there are, and you actually literally have to pull them apart, and they should be kind of separated within the contract. But
yes,
one of the things that in the contracts I've read in my own, you want to stress that you're a non-medical
yes.
person. I'm a nurse, and Maureen's a nurse. Kathleen is a registered dietitian and trauma specialist. And you want to make sure that with Kathleen, her dietitian role, or with Maureen and I is more medical, those roles aren't mixed in, because we are just supportive people. We're not employees, although some doulas do tend to be employees of hospice these days, not many, but it's happening. But we're not employees of an organization, and we're not employees of the client per se either. We basically, it's an independent contract that is signed by that individual. So I think that's really important. And what do we do? Will we provide emotional, spiritual, practical, care, and coordinate and advocate? Things like that should be spelled out.
I think that it should be spelled out how they support the dying and their loved ones, like very clearly spelled out. Do they do bedside vigil care? Do they do bereavement care for the family? And what are their qualifications to be able to provide bereavement care? Because just because we've experienced death doesn't mean we're actually qualified bereavement specialists, So looking for things like that. What are their practices? What are for vigiling? Vigiling is at the time of, the last few days of life. Are they there 24/7? Do they move in with you? Is that what you would want? Are they there for certain periods of time? If they're not there 24/7 when your loved one is actively dying, do they have resources that they bring in? That should be spelled out in the contract on how they're going to handle those things.
Like backup. Do they have a backup? That's important, because in a recent family meeting I had, the caregiver did live within the home, that he had his own special room, but there was another caregiver around that came and went, and that person was also accepted by the family. And so it's up front that you have these people. And if you're going to have a backup, like this individual did, the family knew who that was,
Right.
And so I think that's important with the doula as well.
That the family knows who the backup is and approves of them. Because just because the doula and the family have a good relationship, that doesn't mean that the doula and another doula might have a good relationship. It doesn't mean it's automatically going to be a good fit. Make sure they have more than one resource they can go to for that, to make sure that person backing them up is a good fit for your family also.
Right.
Another thing you said earlier is that non-medical, and that's should be spelled out, but Colleen and I, both nurses, I can't tell you how much medication I've given in my career. And as a doula, I absolutely cannot give medication. Do I know how? Sure, but that's not my role. So make sure that the doula knows her role. You don't want someone that would say, oh, well, I can give that Tylenol. Well, no, they can, but should they? No, they should not. So make sure those types of things are spelled out.
As we're talking here, the other areas that you want to kind of make sure they understand is, does the doula have family meetings? Includes the dying individual if they are able to be there or participate. And when would those family meetings be? Is it over some questions? Because families have questions. Usually, family meetings I've had in the past have usually been around questions. What is the dying process? What's happening next? in the beginning, I remember in this one particular family, it was what he's in palliative care now. And I'm thinking, as she's telling me his signs and symptoms, oh, but he should be in hospice. But that wasn't my job to say he should be in hospice. But my questions were, okay, what do you understand about palliative care? What do you understand about hospice? So sometimes the family meetings can clarify things.
Yes, yes. Another big thing that should be clearly spelled out in a contract is communication. How
Oh,
does
yeah.
the doula communicate with you? How do you communicate with the doula? Do you have 24/7 access to the doula? Most often, no. There's boundaries on both sides, just like you wouldn't want the doula calling you at 2 in the morning unless it was absolutely like imperative. The doula probably is thinking, if there's no need, I really don't want to be called at 2 a.m. either. So, how do you communicate? Do you communicate by email, text, phone call? What's the response time? If you do leave a message, do they respond within 24 hours? If it's your family members not actively dying during the active dying phase, do they respond quicker? So look for those types of things, because I think that communication, talking about the family meeting, that's part of the communication network that should be spelled out.
And one thing I want to add to this too, because living in the era of Zoom and all this digital communication, you actually can hire a doula who is not in your area, and they actually can be supportive over, digital communication like we're having now, and it has been done. I've actually seen a few cases myself, that the person said, yes, I'm an end-of-life doula and I'm dealing with this person in the other state, and this is what we've done. And then they interviewed that person and found out how they had been helped and how comforting they found it. So it's not always in person. So I found that very interesting, that we can reach out beyond our area, especially if
Well,
you
I
live
think
out in
rural.
in rural area and don't have access.
Well, the person I mentioned at the beginning, I've worked with different people in different areas over Zoom, and I know my limitations over Zoom. So we might click and be a good fit at certain points, but I know that if they need a vigil, a doula to vigil, I'm going to find one that will meet their needs, or that they can then interview, and I'm going to help them set up that interview process for the bedside care doula at the time that they would need it, so they get someone that's a good fit.
Right. Now, you may have mentioned earlier, but I just wanted to circle back over this, is fees. Oftentimes doulas they have fees. Not most doulas have fees. There are some that do it as volunteer work, but there are fees, and some doulas have packages with this. And one of the things a client needs to ask is, are the payment methods clear? In how do I pay? How do I get the information? How do I pay for services, etc.?
I love that, and that should be in the contract too. And
You're right.
and do you have a payment agreement? Does it all have to be paid up front? Can you pay over time? And also, what if there's something that happens that turns out to not be a fit? Is there a refund policy? Look at all that. Usually there's probably not going to be a big refund policy, because it's really time of service that things are going on. But if you've prepaid for a package, 3-month package, expecting your loved one to live for 6 months, and for some reason they die in a month, is there a refund policy for that? So things like that are spelled out. I think you have to look for those things in a contract.
Yeah.
And if it's not in there, discuss it if you're buying a package, discuss it with the doula and say, if, let's just say on the off chance that grandpa dies sooner than we expect, then do you have a refund policy? And if they don't, would you write one in? Can we talk about that? If I bought a 3-month package and after 1 month, can we write that into the contract?
And sometimes I think in some ways it's worded services end when the individual dies. So even if they paid for a package, but the refund, I agree wholeheartedly, should be very clear in there, because the family may not expect them to die as soon as they die, or they go on. You can't always predict that.
Right.
So,
And, the family might think, oh, well, I've paid for 3 months and I've only had 1 month of service. So of course I do a refund. But if it's not in the contract,
mhm.
they don't always have to give a refund. So that's why I said I love contracts, because it just makes for great relationships. Okay, great. Here, I know that I'm going to get a refund if grandpa dies after 1 month, but or no, I prepay with no refund and I'm okay with that. So either way, I would also look at termination clause, like if either party decides
Oh,
to end
yes.
the relationship, do you have to do it in writing, and how much time do you have to give to find another doula to step in? So, I mean, you just don't think that these things are going to happen. And unfortunately,
They
occasionally
do.
they do.
And they
Yeah.
do. One of the
And
things,
yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Nope, I'm done.
No, you're not.
I was going to say, really check out their resource network. Is that what you were going to talk about?
No, but go ahead. I think that's a good
I
point.
think, do they have a good resource network that they can draw from? If you need information about funeral planning, do they have that information? Do they have resources to refer you to? Do they have other doulas that deal with different aspects of doula work than they do? I really focus mostly on end of life planning and patient advocate, or, advocacy, helping go to doctor's appointments, things like that, even though I love the vigiling aspect. But I have resources for people that do the vigiling, and that's where their passion and love is. So, look and see what kind of resource network they have.
And Maureen, before we close, because we're at that time, I just want to share with our viewers a statement that was made about end of life doulas. And it's about, as that individual who's dying and family hold their sorrow, the doula holds them. And that is what a doula is. He or she can hold the dying individual and the family. And I thought that was such a beautiful statement.
That is such a beautiful statement. Colleen, we always run out of time. We still have so much more, okay, because we're chatters, but there's so much more that we would love to share. So we hope you'll join us again in the future, or go back and look at some of our recordings from past shows, because really we want the best experience for you at end of life. And one of the things we want to share is that our Gentle Passage Doula Collective is launching our first ever doula training course, because there's so many things that we feel should be the solid foundation, like the National End of Life Doula Alliance and the International End of Life Doula Alliance Association. We follow their guidelines. There should be, we've talked about this in other shows, standards of practice, code of ethics, things like that. But we've had such an outpouring of requests for how do we become an end of life doula, that we are putting together our own training program. We're going to launch in person in the Seattle area in January of 2023, and virtually in March of 2023. We're going to do virtual course. But what I just feel passionate about is that we have educators within our community. Colleen, you're one. You have taught at the collegiate level, you teach doula training and other places, but we also have, even though we're all medical, doulas do not have to be medical, but we bring that wealth of end of life knowledge and experience with us from 5 different perspectives. So I'm very excited about it. So we are going to have an information webinar again, too, in January, early January, and you can look on gentlepassagedoulacollective.com/events. And we also host a monthly death cafe the second Friday of every month, at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. And that also is on the Gentle Passage Doula Collective events page. So we hope you'll go and take a look and think about joining us at the Death Cafe, or if you're interested in becoming a doula, reach out. Thanks so much. And Colleen, another show that went by too fast.
Too fast.
Okay, have a great week, everyone.